So let us put our hands together and welcome our first speaker for the evening, Dr. Oberdan.
Thank you. Before we begin, one additional point of admin. In all kinds of public events, there's always bound to be a lot of questions that people have in their mind. And when it comes to the Q&A, it's often the case that they don't feel comfortable or they think that the question they have is not relevant. So we've introduced technology to allow you to ask questions anonymously. So I invite you to pick up your mobile phone or your tablet or whatever device you have that can connect to the internet. And if you have your 4G data connection, that should be sufficient. Otherwise, on the column just there is the local room Wi-Fi details. Once you've logged in onto the system, I'd like you to go to slido.com. Slido.com. Once you go to the website, depending on what device you have, you should see a page like this that allows you to enter an event code. And the event code for tonight is Love Life. You write Love Life in that box, you press go, and that should take you to a screen like this. That, as it suggests, is the place where you get to type your question, and the ask button is what you press to post it. When you post it, it goes onto the main screen. We will activate it later. It's behind the presentations, but we will activate it during the Q&A. And you also have the opportunity to vote the questions you see. I'm afraid the screen is a bit bright, so you won't be able to see much. But what the arrow is pointing to is a thumb up icon, similar to what you see on Facebook. And the questions with the highest votes, they go at the top. So when we address the Q&A, we will start with the questions at the top. And if you have questions in the room, by all means, we can also address them directly. Yes?
Sorry, what was the code?
Love Life. The code, once again, is on the screen, Love Life. Okay, I leave you to connect to Slido. I'll move to my presentation. And let me once again say hello and good evening. It's an honor to be here. I was just having a chat with Dr. Sylvia a few moments ago and said to her that every opportunity we have to spread the message of positive sexuality is a wonderful opportunity. And as a clinical sexologist now working with individuals and couples in the sphere of relationships, intimacy, and sexuality, I know how many questions are out there and how many few resources people have to go and ask those questions comfortably, non-judgmentally, and openly. So I have entitled my presentation for today, Let's Break the Silence, because as you will see me build the story, you will recognize that my story revolves around the fact that much of what is happening in the sexuality sphere is not being discussed, debated, or addressed at many levels. And my mission is to open up the debate on sexuality and make it normal, make it okay for us to talk to our children, to our friends, to our doctors, and to our mental health practitioners who can help us address the questions that we have. And to date, we don't really have resources to address. So I'm Dr. Oberdan Marianetti. I have 2 psychology degrees from the UK and a doctorate degree in human sexuality from the US. I've had a rather eclectic career, we could say. I started my life as an officer in the paratroopers regiment in Italy. I moved into IT, I moved into corporate, I ran my own business, I moved back into corporate. I then decided to retrain and become a psychologist, which then led me to stay with corporates for a little bit longer, working as an executive coach, a leadership development consultant, and an organizational development specialist. And then, as life always has a way of doing, life threw me some questions that I didn't have the answers for. And I so decided to go back to the books and complete my doctorate in human sexuality, which revealed a whole new world of possibilities, both for me individually and for me as a partner and a lover to my wife, but also as a professional. And so I decided to step out of corporate and set up my own practice and working with individuals and couples who want to rediscover the beauty of their relationship, who want to reconnect to the power of their intimate potential and express it either with themselves in their solo sexuality or with their partners. And it's been an amazing journey. And so being here gives me the opportunity to share some more. Marketing plug, which obviously is a need. I've brought my book. It's available here tonight. Either the team at the end can help you get it. It goes for $15, or I have some here at the front, and I'd be happy to write something in it if so you wish. And then you are free to collect a leaflet that says a little bit about what my services are in my private practice and what kind of work I do, which is also at the end. That's the end of my plug. So, before we start, I hope some of you have already gone into the Slido. What I would like to do is I would like you to go to your screen because you should see a poll question coming up. And it's a way of getting a sense of how the app works, but also to see for yourself where is your love life at the moment. Forgive me, I forgot to put it on the right screen. Okay, so the question you should have seen popping up on your screen is, how would you rate your current love life? And it goes from 1, disastrous, to 5, amazing. And just click the right button for you and we'll get a sense of where you are. While you do that, can you show a hand if you have been able to log in so I know how many people we are expecting to vote? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, maybe 10, 12 people. Okay, we got 10, so we're almost 100%. All right, 13, okay, so maybe a bit more. Well, that's actually quite good. The majority of you are stating their current love life to be good. There is one disastrous, but hey, every normal distribution has an outlier, so you must have one. Okay, we'll come back to Slido later on. I will deactivate the poll so that you can go back to asking questions if you have any. And I don't know if there's any been posted already. Okay, so there you go. You have an example there. I'm assuming that's a name, so Rajita has just posted something. But that's what you will see when we have the questions. Let me go back to the presentation. Okay, so a recent study, and by recent I mean 2016, so it doesn't get any earlier, any more recent than that, which reviewed hundreds and hundreds of studies between 2000 and 2014 about female sexual dysfunction, narrowed down their research to 95 studies that met their very stringent criteria. And what they wanted to do, they wanted to understand what's the size of the problem in the world, regardless of geography, social economic status, or otherwise. And what they found is that out in the world, 41% of the female population suffers at some point in time one or another kind of sexual dysfunction. Now, I'm going to challenge the idea of sexual dysfunction, as you will see later, but stick with that for a moment, because even if it is not real, it is real that it's causing distress to a whole lot of women. And if you think about 41%, that's 2 in 5 women. That is a humongous amount of women who are experiencing some kind of distress to do with their sexuality, and yet we're not talking about it. How many of you, raise your hand, freely and openly discuss with somebody, it could be your doctor, it could be a friend, it could be your partner, about the sexual questions issues, curiosities, challenges that you have. Raise your hand if you freely discuss that with people around you. 5, 6, 7 people. So clearly the large majority don't. And that puzzles me, because if there's 41% of women out there being affected somewhat, and they are living through this distress in silence, I can only imagine that the distress is compounded by the very fact that they have no one out there to address these questions with. And the reason we need to talk about it, if you wish, the business case as to why this is important, because in my private practice, I see a direct correlation between silence and the following 3 items. Silence is leading to lack of information, which creates a whole range of misplaced expectations, which ultimately lead to unnecessary suffering. And the reason I say unnecessary suffering, and it is the first place where I'm going to challenge the sexual dysfunction model, is that much of the work I do, not because I choose to do it, but because of the type of clients I see, is a knowledge issue. Many of the clients I see come to me with lack of information, lack of knowledge about their own sexuality, sexuality in a relationship, and create, therefore, a set of distressing conditions just because they've never been told how things work. Just because they have always felt ashamed to masturbate and to discover their own body. And so I believe it's important that we open up the debate on sexuality, because much of this suffering could just disappear into thin air. Now, clearly it's not as simple as I'm trying to make it sound. It is quite a complex affair, no pun intended there, but the reality is that discussion, education is a necessary tool for us to move into a positive expression of our own sexuality. And so what's the consequence of this? Why are we not talking about it? And the observations I've made, both from the literature and my own clinical experience, is that we've become embarrassed to talk about it. And women in particular, I believe, in 2016, are still subjected to sexual oppression of one kind or another. And I'm going to give you some examples throughout history. They're not necessarily modern, but to give you a flavor of how the journey of female sexuality has evolved in an environment of very, very heavy oppression. The first one that I picked up was the medical model. Not more than 100 years ago, women were being medically treated if they were deemed to be hysterical or nymphomaniac. Today, both those definitions have disappeared from the reference book that doctors and mental health practitioners use to identify conditions. It's called the DSM, the Statistical Manual something something. I never remember acronyms. It's irrelevant. They have disappeared because people have recognized that they were completely inaccurate in describing what doctors were addressing. Women who had sexual desire, sexual urges, sexual activity were considered to be sick. And for many of them, they ended up having their clitoris removed, which of course still happens today in a completely different context, non-medical, with clitoral mutilation that happens in some areas of the world. They were interned into medical mental institutions as sick, mentally sick, and the extreme cases even went through partial lobotomy, which is basically the removal of some of your brain components that the doctors at the time believed were the drivers of this sickness. Thankfully, that's gone. But imagine if only 100 years ago, that's the model by which we considered and addressed women's sexuality. It kind of gives you a flavor of where we were and perhaps where we still are. Cultural. There's a whole book to write about just cultural. I picked one. Women are filthy. And I'm using an example of menstrual blood as the actual tangible that people point into. In history, again, not that long ago, women who were menstruating were deemed to be dirty, were deemed to be filthy, were deemed to be not infectious, but I can't think of the English word now, so stay with me. The idea being that even if they touched something or somebody, it would be contaminated because they were during their menstrual cycle. And that had a huge impact in terms of their sexuality, their relationships, men looking at them as impure. That's the word, impure, that I wanted to say. So another cultural element, or another element in the cultural domain, that talks about the way we've looked at female sexuality in history. And a more modern one, if you wish, the Madonna whore complex was originally created by the very famous Sigmund Freud. Now, the model by which he created this idea, and much of his work actually has been somewhat discredited, but the reality is that many of the reminiscences of the Madonna whore complex still exist today. So first of all, what is it? The idea that a man is physically and sexually attracted to a free sexual woman, one who allows herself to be expressive in her sexuality, and yet that woman being unmarriable. And the one that they can marry is the good girl. Now, from a psychological perspective, once again, we've moved away from that model. It doesn't quite work like that. But from a social perspective, it still exists. And you can think of a million examples where we are still talking about being the good girl. The messages that family give us, the messages that church give us, the messages sometimes that government in their efforts to educate in sexuality give us, the media, the Hollywood films, everything continues to make this distinction between the whore, which is the one to go for from a sexual perspective, and the Madonna, which is the one to go for if you want to have a family. One of the impacts that has for women, which I see in my room when I speak to them, is they come into the room saying, I would love to do this, and this with my husband and be free to express my sexuality, but if I do, I fear I'm going to be judged as dirty, inappropriate, and whatever. So, whistle-stop tour of the fact that we've become embarrassed to openly and freely address the question of sexuality when it comes to women, especially because there is a long ongoing history of women's sexuality being oppressed. And I believe it is still alive and kicking, and we need to do something about it. So, to do something about it, I'm going to talk about one of the aspects of sexual dysfunction that affects women most. And that is what the DSM, the book I talked about earlier, refers to as the hypoactive sexual desire disorder, which in a simple, plain English word means little or no desire for sex. 28% of women are deemed statistically to be affected by this. And if we believe in the medical model, the pathologizing approach to female sexuality, we are told that these women are broken and they need to be fixed. And yes, it is absolutely the case that in some occasions something has gone wrong physiologically that needs to be addressed. But for many women, it has nothing to do with their body and their physiology. And the lack of desire comes from a whole other host of factors that we aren't talking about. So some of the reasons why it might actually go wrong for real, why there might be a disorder, are body changes. They happen naturally because of aging, sometimes they happen because of illness, sometimes they happen because of accidents or whatever, but anything from physical change in neurological, cardiovascular, or hormonal changes can indeed impact one's own desire, men and women, but we stick with women for tonight. Then, of course, there's the psychological domain, and it's a whole world in its own right. The way one perceives their own sexual orientation, which of course is a taboo in its own right, and we don't talk about it. Mental health, things like depressions, compulsions, past sexual trauma. Relationship issues, big, gigantic domain where we are not talking about the ways to solve it. And so one of the very common one I see is husband and wife becoming married, never really having addressed the question of sexuality, and as they then begin to go into their routine, they realize that one partner wants it 10 times, the other partner wants it 1 time, and they don't have the skills to communicate and negotiate about it, and the relationship begins to break. And then, of course, self-perception. Body image, massive, massive issue for women all around the world. Just look at the way marketing, the fashion, is that what I'm talking about? Yeah, fashion industry and media in general portray the ideal woman that a man should go for, and you get an immediate reality check of how different that is from everyday life and everyday men and women. That's the second domain of why things might generally go astray. And then the third one, of course, is external factors, lifestyle. Alcohol consumption and other substances. If you've had surgery, smoking, of course, might not help. And then, of course, medication. There are medications that it is known have a direct effect on sexual desire. But guess what? Not even the doctor who's prescribing you that medication is either prepared or willing to speak to you about it. There's research that shows that doctors themselves classify themselves as unable to speak about sexuality. And to give you one real example, last year, Singapore, believe it or not, hosted the 22nd Sexology World Conference. This is a huge event for people in the business of sexology, and Singapore hosted it. It was sponsored by NUH, and one of the first speakers was one of their young gynecologists who stood up to open the conference and said, I am grateful to be in front of you. I have so much to learn because I don't know anything about sexuality. Everybody was like, what are you talking about? And then he said, have a guess how many hours of human sexuality training I had in my entire medical student career. And it was just a handful. So the thing is, as general citizens out there, we go to our doctors as the first port of call for many of our questions. And even those of us, and there are not many, who have the courage to ask the sexual related questions, often can be met by a doctor who shuns the question away because they're just not trained, not willing, and very uncomfortable to speak about it. So who the hell do you speak to? It's crazy. It really is. So these being the external factors, again, to keep it on the very generic point, and I will give you some more in-depth points at the end, what can you do about all these things? Again, I'm not going to stop on any of them. The next part is where I'm going to give you some more flesh, if you want, but communicating with your partner, with your doctor, with your church leader, with your friend, with your sister, with your parents, doesn't matter. Beginning to open up and talk about it, absolutely necessary. The internet is a wonderful, wonderful resource. There's no excuses for not having the knowledge. How you then apply to yourself might be a different question, but research, research, research. Talk to experts. Dr. Sylvia, myself, there's other practitioners in Singapore you can talk to. Go and talk to them. Ask the questions. Lubricants. I'm not going to go into that. We're going to talk about more today about other kinds of treatments, but lubricants are another very good thing to do. Toys. A lot of people are afraid of introducing toys because it might mean that they're not doing it right or they shouldn't be needing external help or whatever, but the reality is they can be a huge addendum to the relationship. Exercise, etc., etc., etc. There's a whole world of things you can do about it. But tonight, as quickly as I'm already doing, I want to offer you, I think it's 3 or 4 real nuggets that I believe could make a difference for you. The first one, and this is the second time I'm going to challenge the sexual dysfunction model, is to tell you a little bit more about the research about desire. So, for a long, long time, the model of desire has been, I experience desire for sexual intercourse or sexual activity of some kind or another. That desire leads me to beginning to feeling aroused and then hopefully getting involved in sexual activity, either on my own or with my partner, or partners, as you like, which ultimately and hopefully would lead to orgasm. This is called the spontaneous desire model. Now, for many people, it doesn't work like this. And we have told them today that if this is not happening for you, and therefore you are not going into the journey of sexual activity and ultimately orgasm, you are broken and you need to be fixed. Hold your horses. Because research from the early to mid 2000s, and is now pretty much accepted in the field of sexology, suggests that there is a large proportion of human beings, and in particular a larger proportion within the women population, who experience the sexual response cycle the other way around, whereby they actually have, we call it a responsive desire model. So whereby they are exposed or are engaging themselves in sexual activity, and the physical arousal response that comes from it then generates the psychological desire that closes the loop and eventually can go to full intercourse and orgasm, ideally multiple of them. So why is this important? Because the large chunk of people who have walked around Earth being told and thinking that they are broken because they just don't feel that desire spontaneously, as we've been told this should be the case, can now put themselves within another bucket, which has its limitations. Every labeling, every bucket has its limitations, but nevertheless can put themselves in another bucket and say, hold on a second, maybe I can negotiate with my partner to do it differently. And rather than expect that we should be able to jump on each other spontaneously every minute of the day, perhaps we can work on creating ways that gets us, or at least me, aroused first, so that I can get into the mood and feel the desire and still be with my partner completely, rather than just laying down wishing for this to be over as quickly as possible. So the first big nugget that I want to share with you tonight is, don't necessarily believe that the truth that we have been told for a long time, or that indeed was the truth for a long time, is the only truth. And do be aware that for many people, men and women, but more women in this case, desire actually kicks in after arousal. So that's the first one I wanted to share with you. The second one is what I call the 3 L's of relationship. L's as in the letter L. So the first one is limerence. Not many people have heard the word limerence. Limerence is the phase in the relationship, which is the honeymoon period at the beginning. Everybody, one way or another, has experienced more or less intensely in their life. And it's the time when all you can think about is this partner or potential partner that has showed up in your life. If you are together, you can't keep your hands off of each other. If they have a fault, you look at that fault as an endearing characteristic that makes them even more beautiful than they already are, which of course later on becomes a real fault, and all of a sudden you go, how could I not see that before? Limerence is that phase where you are drawn almost obsessively to your partner. Now, there's many explanations of why this exists. One of them is the evolutionary psychology aspect of it, which says the reason why that phase exists, during which, by the way, hormonal changes also occur, the love hormones coming in and making us feel these sensations, which is designed to make sure that we stick around that partner long enough to increase the chances of procreation, which of course from an evolutionary perspective is key to the survival of our race. There are other explanations, but suffice to say that limerence is a real phase. It's what we often refer to as being in love, and it's different from the other 2 L's that I'm about to share with you. The second one, which I think we're all familiar with one way or another, is lust. This is the erotic power, the love that comes in the sexual form that the Greeks called eros, which is why it's called erotic. And I don't need to say much about it. You get the picture of what erotic love and lust looks like, so I'm not going to linger on it. The third one, which you are also familiar with, but is the one that most people get confused with, is love, of course. Now, many people who come to my consultations and talk to me about the journey they're on confuse love with either lust, limerence, or a mixture of the two. So, for example, couple, 15 years together, come to the room, we're on the verge of divorce, we want to do something about it. And one of the questions I always ask is, what are you doing about it, or what have you already done about it? And very often one of the answers is, we're trying to recreate the phase that we had when we first met 15 years back. And it's a bit of a disappointment. It is a bit of a disappointment having to tell them this, but I tell them straight, it will never come back. You have to work on designing a new version of a relationship that works with you being 15 years old, with a mortgage, with 3 kids, with fees for the school, whatever the case might be. And so we then work on understanding a model of love, which is one of choice, which is about choosing to be with this partner, choosing to negotiate every day the reality of the life of 2 individuals who have decided to quote-unquote collide and create a world of their own. And yet, very often you hear comments when asking about love that very directly refer to lust and or limerence. And so my second nugget for the evening is, ask yourself, what is it that you are looking for in your relationship? What is it that you are receiving in your relationship? And what labels have you given to what? When you understand the difference of the 3 phases, how they work in the relationship, what role they play in the relationship, you give yourself the tools to put the energy where the real change really can happen. The third item is giving and receiving. Just earlier this evening, I think it was Kathleen I was speaking with, and we were talking about how in modern life you often hear the language from men and from women, I have to learn to please my partner. How can I give her earth-shattering orgasms? How can I learn to give him pleasure? Well, the reality is twofold. Number one, we don't give anything to anybody. We give ourselves the permission and the openness to have pleasure, to experience orgasm. Nobody gives us anything. And you might have noticed that with a partner who's been with you for some time, a few months or many years, who early in your relationship pressed all the right buttons, all of a sudden it doesn't work any longer. Hold on a second. You used to be able to give me all these orgasms, and now all of a sudden it doesn't work any longer. Nobody gives us anything. The second point I want to make is we are so obsessed with giving that we often enter intimate relationships with the desire to give and have forgotten and have not learned to receive. And so you get partnerships where he wants to give her pleasure, she wants to give him pleasure, everybody wants to give, but there's nobody at home to receive. And so in the game of giving, there has to be a receiving, otherwise the equation can't close. The loop can't be full. And I invite you as an exercise, and I hope you have wonderful, thriving, alive and kicking sexual lives at the moment. Next time you engage with your partner, actively before engaging, choose who's going to just be receiving. And see how bloody difficult it is to just stay there and resist the temptation to reach out for whatever you want to touch or do whatever. Just receive. Now, clearly, I'm expressing the exercise in a physical way, but it is the psychological aspect of letting go and receiving that is the most difficult. But if you want to have a fulfilling relationship, sexually included, you've got to be able to move between the 2 dimensions. You have to be able to give when it's time to give, to receive when it's time to receive, and vice versa. And the fourth one I want to share with you, and that's the end of my slot, and then we can look at some questions, I want to share with you in the form of a video, which I hope the audio works. No, the audio doesn't work. Is anybody here from the technical team? Okay, the audio on the machine is on, so I think it's the audio in the room that is not on. You got it, thank you.
I'm a forensic artist.
A bit more.
Worked for the San Jose Police Department from 1995.
Hold on, let's do it again.
I'm a forensic artist. Worked for the San Jose Police Department from 1995 to 2011.
I showed up to a place I'd never been, and there was a guy with a drafting board.
We couldn't see them, they couldn't see us.
Tell me about your hair.
I didn't know what he was doing, but then I could tell after several questions that he was drawing me.
Tell me about your chin.
It kind of protrudes a little bit, especially when I smile.
Your jaw.
My mom told me I had a big jaw.
What would be your most prominent feature?
Kind of have a fat, rounder face.
The older I've gotten, the more freckles I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
All I had been told before the sketch was to get friendly with this other woman, Chloe.
Today I'm gonna ask you some questions about a person you met earlier, and I'm gonna ask you some general questions about their face.
She was thin, so you could see her cheekbones. And her chin, it was a nice, thin chin.
She had nice eyes. They lit up when she spoke.
Cute nose.
She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes.
So here we are. This is the sketch that you helped me create, and that's a sketch that somebody described of you.
So yeah, that's...
She looks closed off and fatter, sadder too. The second one looks more open, friendly, and happy.
I should be more grateful of my natural beauty. It impacts the choices and the friends that we make, the jobs we apply for, how we treat our children. It impacts everything. It couldn't be more critical to your happiness.
Do you think you're more beautiful than you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time as women analyzing and trying to fix the things that aren't quite right. And we should spend more time appreciating the things that we do like.
So the message to you is you might have questions, you might have fears, you might have insecurities, you might have doubts, you might have lack of knowledge and or understanding about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a sexual being in modern society. My message to you is you're already as beautiful as you are. And if you do have those questions, those doubts, those insecurities, go and educate yourself, go and take courses, go and read, go and talk to people, do something about understanding the reality is you already are as beautiful as you are. So, thank you. To close. Okay, we got one question. You can ask more, but before you ask the other questions, I'd like to ask you another question myself. Earlier I said, how would you rate your current love life? And the second one is, how would you like to rate your love life 6 months from now? We'll aim for the 12 mark, and then I'll give you the last poll before we go. Amazing. That's cool. Yes, absolutely. Why would you not want to improve? 4 amazings. 5 amazings. Good. Maybe this is the person that started from disastrous. 3 points improvement. That's a hell of an improvement. All right, 9 responses. I think we get the picture. Is amazing or thereabout. And what would it really mean to you if you did see that improvement? And please answer in a free text form using 1 or 2 words only. 1 or 2 words to tell us what would it really mean if it genuinely improved from your first score to the second. As people write their words, there you go. We should see a word cloud popping up, and the more the word becomes popular, the bigger space it occupies to give us a sense of what the themes in the room are. But for the moment, I know it's a bit bright, so you might not be able to see it. The answers we're receiving are harmony, marriage, ecstatic, happiness, relaxed, partner, blissful, important, confidence. Which one has just come in? Desired, oh yes, desired, life. Okay, thank you very much. So I think I forgot how many, but maybe 5 minutes if I remember correctly for my segment of the Q&A. So let me stop the poll and see if any questions has come in. Okay, so the first one clearly isn't a question, so we'll skip it. How often do most people orgasm during sex? Oh, during sex. Is that, I'm assuming duong stands for during. I'm sensing a desire for a benchmark against which you, whoever asked the question, can measure whether you are doing it up to the right standard. And I'm not going to give you a number because there isn't a number. Not only there isn't a number, but the very same man or the very same woman with the same partner, or indeed with themselves when they masturbate, might orgasm 0 times or might orgasm 15 times. So what would you say is the norm for that person? How do we put a marker on it? So I'm not going to give you a number. I'm just going to tell you that learn to understand how your body works. Learn to understand how orgasm is experienced by you and how many do you want, and therefore what do you do about making that connection happen more frequently or more fulfillingly. No sex for a long time. Will it lead to menopause? No, not that I'm aware of. It might lead to relational issues, as I think you can imagine. It might lead to a disconnection from the sense of sexual self. For some people who might be already prone, it might lead to some level of anxiety and or depression when being faced by a partner that is asking for sex. But I'm not aware of it leading to menopause. Is oral sex unhygienic? If you've never washed and your partner has never washed, I would suggest it is highly unhygienic. But if you have had regular showers and drink cranberry juice, which allegedly is good for you, pineapple juice is supposed to give a good flavor, by the way. But anyway, no, it is not unhygienic, but it's all correlated to genuinely what your body maintenance is. I can't think of the right word. What is the average days in weeks okay, same as the orgasm. Now, you would have figured probably between the lines that when I said I don't believe in the sexual dysfunction model is that I generally don't buy into labels, numbers, etc. But research has a reason to exist and it has informed a lot of our progress. So it also has its value. When you look at research around sexual frequency, it is suggested that people who have sex 10 or less times in 1 year, 12 months, are deemed to be in sexless relationships. But it goes back to what is your desire? What is your appetite? What is your negotiation with your partner? What are the things that work for you that you want to engage in? So to actually say what is the average days in the week a couple should have sex, which I'm assuming means how many times a week a couple should have sex, has no meaning. You might have heard there's a fairly new trendy term which is asexuals, which is a new form of sexual orientation and identification that people are using. And asexuals are individuals who experience little or no sexual desire. So are they broken because they don't want to have sex? They don't want to orgasm 15 times a week? It's just the range of what the human condition's possibilities are. And once again, my invite is to go and figure out what's your number, what works for you and your partner. That's a much healthier way of looking at it. I'm trying to archive them, but I can't seem to click the right button. Oh, here we go. Let's see if there's any other questions. What is the average days? We've done that. We've done that. Number of days. What is the healthy sex duration? Okay, I'll take these two and then we'll close because I think I'm running out of time. So, what is healthy sex duration? I think these are all coming from the same person. How many times a week should I do it? How many orgasms should I have and how long should it last? You know the answer. The duration is depending on what you do. And also, when you say sex duration, what are you talking about? Are you talking about penetration? Are you talking about foreplay being part of sex? Are you talking about a tantric energetic experience? Do you consider that sex? And therefore, are you counting it into the duration? The world is your oyster. You get the picture. And the last one I was going to take was the next one. If men never initiate the sex, does it mean he is broken? You know, while the percentage might be lower, there are also men who experience the desire and their sexual response cycle the other way around. And so they might not feel in the mood for a whole variety of reasons, but they might be willing and prepared to engage in an arousing activity which could then bring desire in the interaction. And that's one way of answering that question. The other could be what I said earlier. What if your man identifies as asexual and actually hasn't got much appetite? How do you negotiate a relationship that appeases both of your desires and wishes? I can see more questions are coming in, but I know we need to wrap up for my session. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your attention. If you want my book, come and see me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oberdan, for the interesting and insightful, helpful insights. Okay, so we need to wrap up his sessions. If you have more questions, feel free to ask him at the end of the talk. If you like his book, you can get it at the back as well.